Okay, Dr. Mark, now it's 8:32. We robbed a minute,
Okay.
but you can take it back at the end.
First, we want to thank the new sponsor. You want to mention it?
You can go.
Okay. Thank the Broders for also travelers with us this summer, I think to Provence, if I'm not mistaken. And so thank you as well. Also, I yesterday was in Brooklyn speaking for a very different sort of group, but a number of them listened to our classes. So again, I want to thank all of you who were with us yesterday. I guess you could say I'm the only modern Orthodox person that was there with my son, but it's a great, great, amazing group. And so thank you all for that. Okay, we pick up again. We missed, we missed, and now we're going to miss again coming up, but we're here today, which is great. I, I've been looking at this book. I think I mentioned this book already, Mohamed's Mitzvah, 2 volumes, translations and articles. Well, obviously relevant to what's going on today. It's subtitled "Religious Leadership and Halachic Responsibility in the Military Service Debate," edited by Aviada Cohen, Yitzhak Avi Rones, and Menachem Butler. And in volume 2, we spoke about Hesder yeshivas. So let me tell you something else. I told you what the first one is, and then Karen, why I didn't mention Karen Biavna. But if you look in here, there's an article by Rav Neria Gutel. He says that really the first one, although they didn't call it Hesder Yeshiva, was in the 1948 war. You had students in the Merkaz Harav Yeshiva who were organized. They were in the army, but actually even before the 48 war, they were in Irgun also in Lechi, and they had an arrangement with the yeshiva and with the government that they would do military service and Torah study. And this was founded with the approval of Tzvi Yehuda Kook and also the Nazir. So that's good to know. I want to mention one more thing, actually. I forgot to mention it that we spoke about Rav Kook very interestingly, how he's very personal. He describes himself in certain ways. Um, Now, so why does he do that? Well, if you look in Rav Suriel's introduction to his edition of Shmona Kvatzim, he says, well, he says, the first thing he says is that he calls attention to what Rav Kook writes in the Shmona Kvatzim, book 6, number 34, where Rav Kook says that sometimes if you're feeling down, the only way to raise yourself is by, writing things positive from your heart. And so that's how he explains why this was. And elsewhere, if you look at in the appendix to the book, page 1107, he says that this is not a question of gaiva. This is, Rav Kook's great appreciation for God that he gave him these special talents. And so, however you look at it, it's not like Rav Kook published these things saying about himself, but in his own private musings, he speaks about his faults, his defects. He says, uh, he says that the people who respect me so much, they don't know about all my faults. But he also speaks about the positive things. It's like Moshe Rabbeinu certainly knew his positive qualities, and yet he still is a none of. So that's how you have to see Rav Kook. These are not meant to be published. There was a lot of, it was shock when they published before many of these passages came out in book form in their own books. There's a book Chadarav of Rav Kook, which his innermost thoughts they took them out of and they published them all together, and you really see the way he reflects about himself, his role in this world, his confidence, his feelings of doubt, and should have this been published? Some people said it shouldn't have been because these are personal musings and thoughts. But at the end of the day, you have members of the family that permitted this. They thought it's important, and we usually are taught that with great Gedolim, you know the story. The student hides under the bed, and the Rebbe sees him. What are you doing down there? Torah heave, I mean, at the end of the day, these great figures don't have private lives, and if they want private lives like everyone else has, then they shouldn't become these Gedolim, because at the end of the day, we assume that there's something to learn from them, even in their most private moments. And like it or not, that's just the reality. What we are doing, however, is we're in chapter three. We're going to finish up chapter three quickly and then get to chapter four, which is a very long chapter, very interesting chapter, I think, because the issues it deals with are, I don't know, cutting edge, or well, there's a lot of cutting edge stuff. Wait till you see what Rav Kook says about the role of the masses. You think that everything is about Torah scholars? No. The masses have an important role to play also, but we'll get to that. Uh, getting back, picking up again in chapter three, there's a few other points I want to make. Rav Kook, we deal a lot with heresy in this chapter, and Rav Kook makes the interesting point that when you deal with heretics, I mean, many of these heretics were brilliant people with lots of talents. Rav Kook says that many heretics, in fact, he even says most, were led astray because they were only exposed to the theological perspective of the masses, which they conclude is incorrect. In other words, they're presented with a type of Judaism which is really a Judaism not for elites, not for intellectuals, but it's really a very basic type of Judaism. And they come to identify Judaism with that. And when they can no longer accept this form of Judaism, when they see it as not speaking to them, when they see it as having falsehoods, then since they identify it with Judaism, they don't throw out these ideas and adopt higher ideas. They throw out the religion lock, stock, and barrel. I could give you an example. Like, let's say you come from a community which is full of all sorts of superstitions. And the superstitions are considered, basically Judaism. And then you reach the point, well, you don't believe in these superstitions. There's all, I mean, we can give all different examples of superstitions. And therefore you say, well, since I don't believe in these superstitions, therefore I'm going to throw the religion out because the religions identify as superstitions. But if they were more sophisticated, they'd understand that these are superstitions, but how some people understand the religion, but this is not the religion in its essence. In fact, Rabbi Kafach, and yesterday I spoke on Rav Kafach. Those who are interested, I've spoken in Torah in Motion about him. And you can see online as well. If you want, I can send the link to my talk on him. But Rav Kafach makes an incredible point. If you look at the Mishnah Torah, Yesodei Torah, the first four chapters deal with philosophy and science, and the Rambam gives his whole notion of astronomy with the planets and the spheres, I should say, and everything revolving around the Earth. And Rav Kafach said, don't, in his commentary, don't think that any of this is Torah. It comes from Torah. This is the Rambam adopting the most advanced science of his time. And then he says, if you think that this is Torah, as opposed to the Rambam just using science to make his points about prophecy, etc. If you think it's really Torah, then you have a real problem, because if you think this is halacha Moshe Messina or anything like that, and you know it's false, and anyone with a smattering of scientific education today knows it's false, then you're going to say, well, this is Torah, it's false, and then everything gets thrown out. Then you throw out Torah also. No, the Rav Kafach explains we need to distinguish what is actual Torah truth, for what is not really Torah, just a way that great figures use to understand Torah matters. And therefore, when we throw out the Rambam science, we're not throwing out Torah itself. And that's what Rav Kook says. And that, he says, is a big problem, that people are led astray because they think they're rejecting. Rav Kook says it elsewhere about atheism. A lot of the atheists, they're atheists, but they're not really rejecting God. They're rejecting the simplistic views of God that they were taught. And therefore they say, well, I can't accept that. And they think they're atheists. But had they been taught more sophisticated understandings, they wouldn't have been. Rav Kook also has, he doesn't just identify heresy from that angle. He has other approaches. So, for instance, he says that some people are led to heresy, or I should say alienation from traditional Judaism, which of course will then lead to heresy, because they were forced to study things that they didn't appeal to them. If you know the situation in Eastern Europe, everyone was forced to study the Talmud-only curriculum. If you tried to study Tanakh and philosophy, you were knocked down. And therefore, Rav Kook says that they betrayed their inner nature, because their inner nature was not in the direction of Talmud study. And therefore, if you don't give people an opportunity to expand themselves, this is what will lead to rejection, alienation of traditional Judaism. Just think about our schools now. Can you imagine what would happen even in the Limudei Kodesh, forget about Limudei Chol. Let's assume we even have Limudei Chol. But Limudei Kodesh, we tried to put everyone in the same box and said, this is all you can study. We would alienate everyone, with the exception of a few, specific people who are talented in these areas. Now, this wasn't an issue, let's say 150, 200 years ago, because who went to yeshiva? Very few people did that. Most people just they got jobs and they were just members of the Hamonam. But today, when we're giving people educations, and when people understand the importance of education, to tell them that you cannot expand your Jewish education, you're forced just to this little area, that's going to alienate people. And Rav Kook saw the beginnings of this. And but it's not just that. He says that, as we've seen already, matters of Kabbalah and Agadah, these are also the soul of the Torah. And he says that we've abandoned this because it's not just that we tell some people they can't study it. No one is allowed to study this. In the traditional yeshiva curriculum, no one was allowed to study this. So fine, so Rabbi Soloveitchik, in his approach, you don't really need this if if you're a halachic man, because everything's there. But yet the Rav himself, the great irony is that the Rav can only explain what a halachic man is by not being halachic man. Because halachic man is only focused on Talmud and halacha, and yet the Rav, to explain this, he needs to bring in Hermann Cohen and Kant and everything. So that's the great paradox here, that even the Rav, who explains halachic man, himself could not be halachic man the way he describes it, and he couldn't even explain what halachic man is. He couldn't explain what Reb Chaim Brisker is, at least he thought he couldn't, without using all these other fields, everything from Yiddish writers and poetry to philosophy, etc. Yes, Rabbi Kalman, thank you for Rav Kafech. There's my two talks, and I think it's only two. Okay, we've done a lot more. Yesterday we did a lot more, but we can come back. I speak about Rav Kafech all the time on these classes, as you know. Okay. The last thing I want to end, which I end in this chapter, is I point out that, yes, you have a figure like Rav Kook who writes everything that comes to his mind. There's a term for this. Someone just shared it with me the other day. GARF. I can't remember the term, but like someone who feels they have to write everything that comes to their mind. It's unlike Rav Yisrael Salanter. Rav Yisrael Salanter said, not everything you think you write, and not everything you write you publicize. It seems that Rav Kook, everything he thought, he wrote. And often in short, pithy statements of a line or two, and then sometimes for pages and pages. And it flows from him. If you look at his writings, very few crossouts. It is like the first draft, and he's just writing. And there are contradictions. There's no question. Sometimes he'll say something which is at odds with other things. So if you have Rav Kook says the same idea 10 times and then a different idea one time, obviously you mentioned the one time, but the mainstream approach of his is the 10 times. There are contradictions. And I cite Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg. Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg says, after you hear what I tell you he says, try to see if this works with every great figure, but it certainly works with Soloveitchik. But Rav Kook has contradictions. Rav Yaakov Weinberg says that great thinkers do not regard it as a compliment if you say about them that they have no inner tension, that everything is smooth. No, with great thinkers, they're effervescent. Rav Soloveitchik will give a shiur one year, and the next year, you give a whole different approach to it because it's a constant effervescence. If someone, especially you think of someone, like you find someone from their youth, from 25, and they never change their mind to 65, there's a problem there because it shows they're not being insightful. They're not examining things carefully. They're just resting on their laurels, as it were. But think about this again. Great thinkers don't think of it as a compliment if you say they have no inner tensions. What Rabbi Weinberg is saying, that great thinkers have these inner tensions and the contradictions come out. Rav Soloveitchik, the way he describes, faith, he says, true faith is not calm. It's not the white tablecloth Friday night. It's stormy. But that's the way it's supposed to be. Chesterton writes about this. True faith is exciting, but it's not calm. It's at least not the way Rav Soloveitchik is writing about in opposition to that book by the Reform rabbi Joshua Loth Liebman, who wrote about how religion, it was a bestseller in America in the 50s, how religion is so important because it's a calming force. And the name of the book, I'm forgetting it. In my old age, I'm forgetting it. One of you will write it in. Joshua Roth Liebman, his famous book about religion, arguing that it's good for people from a psychological sense because it's calming. And Rav Soloveitchik's attitude was no. And Rabbi Weinberg also, the way he writes about Bereshevsky and like he regards him as a religious heretic. And Rav Kook could have said the same thing. It's that religious faith is not calm, but it's full of tension, and that's what makes it so special, I guess you would say. Okay, so we now want to move on, but no one wrote it in, so peace of mind. Okay, I just pulled it up because I wanted to see. It was driving me crazy. Joshua Loth Liebman's book called Peace of Mind. It was number one on the New York Times bestseller list for over a year. Oh, I was wrong in what year it was published. It came out in 1946. He died young, unfortunately, only 41 years old, but he was a Reform rabbi, Joshua. So, okay, now I want to move into chapter. Oh, actually, one more thing. Rav Kook himself said it. This is how I close the chapter. Whoever said about me that my soul was torn expressed it well. A human soul that's not torn is inconceivable. And he explains that, Rav Kook explains that that's the job of man, to unify the opposites. We're all pulled in different directions, and we try to unify them. It's an ideal, Rav Kook says, we can aspire. We never achieve it, but our striving, we come ever closer. We're never going to be totally at peace. There's always going to be tensions within us. We strive. We're always trying to get there, but we never end up getting there, and there's always going to be tensions, and that's the human condition, Rav Kook is saying, and he's speaking about himself, obviously, as well. Okay, chapter 4 is titled Torah, History, and Science. It's actually the longest chapter, I think, of the book. Yeah, like 40 pages. And I go into all sorts of tangents. If you like the Shapiro tangents, you'll enjoy it. If you don't like the tangents, well, I don't know what you're doing in these classes. These classes are Tangent City. But you could also skip over some of those tangents. And the issues are really fundamental that Rav Kook discusses. Many people have told me they were shocked by some of these things, so let me share them with you. And I was fortunate to uncover a lot of material from Rav Herzog. So let me tell you what I try to do in this chapter. First of all, I mean, Torah, history, and science. History and science are important. And I'm going to make this point more clearly in a minute, but usually people speak about Torah and science. What I argue in this chapter is that it's Torah and science, it's a misnomer. Yes, science is important, but really it's history. Because even when they speak about science, they're talking about the history of the world, let's say, that we know through science. So you need both history and science. I begin by mentioning how in 2006, Boaz Ofen published the first volume of this book of Rav Kook called Kvatzim Miktav Yad Kodsho. That is the writings from the Hasidic figures refer to their rebbes as writings, as Ktav Yad Kodsho, holy writings. So Rav Kook's like a rebbe, so you refer to him this way as well. By the way, it's there's a kamatz under the kuf, but if it's Ashkenazi will pronounce it Kodsho, but if you're pronounce it Sephardic, that's what we call kamatz katan. You'll hear people say all the time. You hear them even. I heard them in Rosh Hashanah davening because you have it a few times. Kadsho. It's not kadsho, even though you pronounce a kamatz. But we know there's two types of kamatzes, right? We don't say chachma, chachma. You say chochma. So ever since the Tiberian Masoretes, I don't know what Moshe Rabbeinu, how he pronounced it, or how Rabbi Akiva pronounced it, but that's how he pronounced it, and therefore it's not kadsho. It's either Ashkenazic kodsho or kodsho, just like a cholam, chochma, and Rav Kook. By the way, here it's Rav Kook's first discussion of evolution. I don't discuss evolution in the book really, because it has been discussed, but I'll just tell you, Rav Kook was around when evolution was becoming a real challenge, and Rav Kook set out a principle, and he's the first one to do this. And he did this. This was considered like way out there. I don't think it's so way out there today. Certainly not in more modern Orthodox circles. But Rav Kook first sets out a principle that by definition, Torah and science can't be in conflict. That's a muskal rishon, to use the medieval philosophic term. That's basic. Torah and science can't be in contradiction. True. Now he says that we don't need to accept every theory as fact, but sometimes theories are proven to be factual, at least factual in the way scientists speak about things. So when you start automatically and say that a scientific theory is false, you really have put yourself, because it's against Torah. That's you put yourself in a bad situation, because then what happens if the so-called theory is now proven to be a fact? Therefore, you've given a heter, given permission for anyone to reject the Torah, because you've said that by definition this can't be true. It's in opposition to Torah. Do you know that there were great rabbis who said that you must believe that the sun goes around the earth? Because that's what the Holy Scriptures attest to, and therefore they were saying basically that if you accept the Copernicus's idea, you might as well throw out the Torah. So Rav Kook said these are all mistaken approaches. Every scientific truth has to be in line with Torah truth, and if they appear not to be in line, well, there's couple options here. Either we're not understanding the Torah properly. What's stated literally in the Torah should not be understood literally. I mean, God doesn't have a literal outstretched hand, and it doesn't walk through the garden, um, even though it says it. So there's passages, as we'll see, that appear in the Torah, but taking them literally is incorrect, and therefore, when it says the sun rises, that doesn't conflict with any Copernican idea. There are also times where the science might not be teaching us what it says it's teaching us. And we're not obligated to adopt every theory, but Rav Kook said about evolution, and in his day, it was there's much less scientific basis than you would say today. What he said, though, is we have to go on the assumption that this might be proven correct, and therefore, how will Torah adopt to it? And Rav Kook, on the assumption that evolution is factual, he doesn't know. He might not be, but he's saying that this is how we would respond to it. And he says actually that the secrets of the Torah are more in line with evolution than with not with evolution. And he says that he develops the idea that humanity is moving higher up, and that's what evolution is. And he has a whole way of making the Torah align with evolution. But he's not saying this as that you need to accept this. He's saying that if this theory is correct, this is how we will see it. And it's not heretical because it can't be heretical, because Torah can never be in opposition to science, and nothing that is true, scientifically speaking about there, but it's history also. It's the same thing. Nothing that's true can be heretical. By definition, something that's true can't be heretical. So he's in what was published in 2006 by Boaz Uff and Ktavim Mitavia Kotsho, where we have an early approach of his dealing with evolution. He actually says that I am going to deal with evolution just like the Rambam deals with the eternity of the world of matter. The Rambam says that he doesn't believe that there's eternity in matter. He believes that the world is created ex nihilo, yesh me'ayin. That's the traditional idea. However, Plato disagreed. Plato held that the world was created from eternal matter. And the Rambam says that if this is proven, that the world is created from eternal matter, well, that doesn't destroy the Torah. No, we will just assume that, and the Ralbag later adopted this position, that matter is eternal, and God can't create something out of nothing, but God can't make 2 + 2 = 5. I mean, the Rambam says we can live with that, and therefore, you can explain the Torah this way if you wish to. But the Rambam doesn't accept it. Nevertheless, he accepts the fact that you can you can try to explain the Torah this way. In fact, the Rambam even goes further. The Rambam assumes that if you don't believe in a personal God, and if you believe in eternity of the world where God can't intervene, then really there is no Judaism. But nevertheless, he adopts that approach, l'shitascha. He adopts the approach as a method of argument that the world is eternal, not just the matter, that the world is eternal in order to prove God's existence. And he tells us in the Moreh Nevuchim why he does this. He does this, by the way, in Mishnah Torah. His proof in Hilchos Torah is based upon the fact that the world is eternal. But he says he uses this proof not because he believes in this. He says that would put the lie to religion. But for people who think the world is eternal, at least we can prove to them that God exists based on their beliefs. And now that once they believe God exists, okay, then they can be moved in a more religious direction. That not only does God exist, but it's a God who has involvement in the world, etc. So the Rambam tells us that he will adopt certain approaches, even though he doesn't believe in them, in order to make his points that the other side will believe in them, for the sake of argument, type of argument. And Rav Kook says he'll do the same thing with evolution. He says that even if we don't accept it, we should still make the effort to explain the Torah in line with it. Then while he's speaking about this, he speaks about creation. I mean, we're going to be in the show in a couple of weeks talking about this. And Rav Kook says, because when you deal with evolution, you deal with long periods, what to do with the fact that creation is described as lasting 6 days. And Rav Kook says that we are not bound to any literal understanding of 6 days. Rather, he might have been really the first person to set this out as a principle. Well, actually, the Tiferes Yisrael before him, so in Drush Orach Chaim does it. But Rav Kook really explains the Tiferes Yisrael is more concerned with dinosaur bones and all that, but so Rav Kook is speaking much more philosophically. He says that you have a story that speaks of 6 days. It does not bind us. It could be millions of years. Today, they would say billions of years. And he says that we can speak of a period of millions of years from the creation of man until the realization that he is separate from the animals. And you have the beginning of civilization. So it's not just the creation of man and then the clock starts. No, the creation of man is itself a long process from creation of man as a species until you get to what we would call civilization, advanced figures, advanced humanity. What he's saying is that the entire story of Adam and Eve need not be viewed as historical. Rather, this is like a divine allegory of the creation of humanity. And I mean, with Adam, when he speaks about Adam, Rav Kook, he's speaking about civilized life, not an actual historical man. And you find this in Ibn Ezra, by the way, all the way in Ibn Ezra says that's the secret, that when it says Adam, that Adam refers not to an individual person, because you don't put hey before an individual person. It's the species of humanity. And Rav Kook has a whole explanation of how this works as allegory. The deep sleep that Adam is placed into, Rav Kook explains it. Again, he's saying on the assumption that evolution is correct and that we're not dealing with, a world under 6,000 years, but we're dealing with a year. He uses the word millions of years. Elsewhere, he says billions. And you're dealing with long periods of time. This is how we would explain the Psukim. He doesn't commit to this, but he says this is how we explain it, and this is kosher. This is appropriate if this is true. He's leaving you the options. What does the deep sleep that Adam is placed into? He says this is the length of time it took for humanity to come to awareness of the idea expressed. What happens after the deep sleep? Well, Chava's created, and then it's bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. So what this is an allegory for the long period of development of the most important ideas of civilization: dignity of man, importance of family. What does that mean? Bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. When man and woman understand what it means to come together, to create a civilization, to create a family, to create a marriage. So Rav Kook sees this in when adopting the evolution approach, that all this is an allegory. Literalism would be missing the whole point of what the Torah is about. Um, so that's, I mean, when you read it, I mean, you're blown away by how Rav Kook is rereading the whole story. But again, it's not that he's saying this is what it is. As I say in the book, it need not be viewed as historical. I think today many people reading it will find this very attractive, this approach. But Rav Kook is doing exactly what the Rambam did, putting it out there. If this is what science proves, for all we know, Rav Kook was much happier with a young Earth, to use the term. But he doesn't see it as an Ikar Emunah at all. And he even says that the Kabbalistic truths are more in line with the evolutionary approach, and he goes on to speak about it in his Guide of the Perplexed, Linvuche Ador, in chapter 4, which, by the way, you can find in English on Safaria. There he speaks of billions of years, and he seems to be more committed to the modern scientific approach because he says that this is a problem only for those who are shallow-minded. And on the contrary, those who are true believers will be led to even greater wonder of God. That man is slowly being created through all these different evolutionary um, steps. That is much more impressive from a religious perspective, he thinks, than just a snap creation. Of course, for Rav Kook, we're not dealing with random mutations or anything like that. Everything is guided by God. And therefore, he sums it up that he says, this is what he says, there's no difference between the evolution of the planets and stars, um, over millions of years, or the formation of the fetus over the course of months. In other words, it's all the same thing, that if things are created over time, we don't have to look askance at that. And in the Minvuche Ador, I think it's clear that the beginning of Bereshis is not to be understood as a scientific description, but directed towards a moral end. Now, I say this whether or not he's a young earther, because we still have the problem of how old the world is, because you can count from the genealogies. But however you look at it, he doesn't see Bereshis 1, whether he's adopting the evolutionary perspective or whether he's adopting a more it happened very fast. The whole story there, he sees it as really not scientific, and I would say that his approach, I do say it's in the book, is really a strong rejection of, I coined this phrase, the fundamentalist hermeneutic acrobatics of people like Gerald Schroeder and to a lesser extent Nathan Aviezer. If you know who they are, they've written books dealing with, quote, science and Torah. They start with the assumption that the story, the creation story, is said in the Torah, is describing scientific reality. But until they came around to explain it, no one ever understood the meaning of the verses. So they'll look at the verse and say this is referring to the Big Bang, or this is referring to growth of insects. But when no, they're the only one. So in a sense, it might seem like traditional because they're still adopting. They're saying that Torah is teaching science, but on the other hand, it's very untraditional in the way that they're the only ones in history to ever understand what the Torah is referring to. That can't be very traditional, but from Rav Kook's perspective and many others who I quote in the book, this is a great misinterpretation of what the creation story is telling us, because it's not about science. It's never been about science. Just like when it says the sun rises, or God's outstretched arm is not describing the science of the sun or the anatomy of God. So to the creation story, there is not meant to give us science. So it's a complete rejection of both of those figures. Let me read you, not just them, Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik gave a series of lectures. I don't know why maybe I'll ask Chaim, his son, Rabbi Dr. Chaim Soloveitchik. I just got an amazing letter from Mr. Chaim Soloveitchik explaining something about the Rav, but I don't know if I have to ask him if I'm at liberty to share it. But the Rav taught philosophy in the graduate school at Yeshiva College, a Bernard Rav Graduate School. They would call it later. I don't think when he first started, it wasn't called that. He stopped doing that, and he only taught the Smicha Shirim. He only directed one dissertation, and that was Norman Lamb's. And by the way, big announcement, everyone. The Lamb archives went live yesterday. And wait till you see, including people who are listening to us now, or we're listening to us. I should say, let me just confirm this. Definitely was listening to the class before me because I came on and I saw him. What they have there is they have the archive of all the letters that they have. A lot are missing, obviously, but it's great stuff. And they asked that you go up because you'll find something from me there. They asked me, and the letters of Rabbi Chek of Weinberg I gave them. But some of the letters, the people are not alive anymore, so they didn't ask. So you get some amazing letters all about the Eruv, the Manhattan Eruv, Dr. Lamb's minutes of the meetings with the Agudas Rabbanim and correspondence with Aguda figures there. And you can go, there's a list of all the correspondence, and you can see and pull it up. Some of the letters are not that significant, but look, there's other things there, his drushas, everything. But what I find fascinating are the correspondence, and I saved some of the stuff. I'm afraid maybe they'll take it off. But my project on American halachic history. This is great because in the early 60s, Dr. Lamb has a letter to Rabbi Adams of West of OZ, Tzedek, to Herbert Goldstein West Side Institutional, and to Gerstein, he's a JTS graduate, by the way, but he was rabbi of Spanish and Portuguese, and also to Lookstein. Apparently all the shuls were ending Shabbos at a different time. So they want to get together and end it at the same time. And Rabbi Goldstein's a holdout because Rabbi Goldstein says he was told by the Rav that just a few minutes after, half hour after Shkia, you can end it. And that was apparently too soon for others. So, so this is amazing that and I told you already a few weeks ago that I was in New York. The plan was to go by the Frank tables. There was a mathematician named Frank. I even got the book in the 50s. It came out, these tables tell you when Shabbos ends. To this day, there's still some shows in New York, like KJ, that use the Frank tables. They're ending Shabbos before us, a good 8-9 minutes before us, because we moved away. It must happen in the 1980s. We moved away and now ended Shabbos later. But you have all sorts of great stuff. So if anyone is interested in Dr. Lamb, American Orthodoxy, you have to go. Norman Lamb offered to be chief rabbi of Haifa, to take over chief rabbi of England. There was discussions, and so fascinating. Fascinating materials there. But so getting back to the Rav, I'd ask Chaim, Professor Chaim Soloveitchik, why the Rav stopped teaching in the graduate school. But fortunately, we have notes, a number of notes from different students. One Larry Kaplan published, and then in Hakira, Rabbi Tribitz from Israel published. These are students' notes. And listen what the Rav says. Quote, again, this is from the students' notes, but the Rav says something similar in a published item, if I recall. The Torah is not interested in disclosing any scientific data to man. Revelation was only revealing the will of God, not the wisdom of God. So if the Bible employs the Ptolemaic description of the cosmos, namely that all the planets and the sun revolve around the earth, it was only to present to the people of its time and not to present the true scientific view. In other words, the Torah is speaking to people of its day, so it relates one way. In a different time, it would relate a different way. Look, I think people take this as obvious, but how far do you take this idea that the Torah is speaking to the people of its time? We shall see. Okay. Then I talk about the big problem is Okay, so the first chapter or two of Bereshis, you can see this, read it allegorically, but where do you draw the line? Is it only the first chapter of Bereshis or first couple that you're going to reinterpret allegorically? In the book, I speak about the different commentaries on the Rambam, maybe even the Rambam, the whole Cain and Hevel story. They see it as an allegory of good and evil, and obviously the story of the Eitz Hadas. In fact, I pointed out in my class yesterday, Rav Kook, in his commentary on the Mishnah Torah, says the um, the Yerushalmi says that the reason the woman lights the Shabbos candles is because she put out the candle of the world. So it's like a tikkun. And if you look in the Rambam doesn't give this reason. In fact, Rashi, interestingly enough, in the Gemara, he quotes the Midrash Rabbah, who says that same thing. And then Rashi says that gives another reason, which you might think he's quoting the Midrash, but if you look in the Midrash, it's not there, and this reason is not found in any rabbinic source. He says because women are at home, so they light the candles. The Rambam gives the same reason. Um, so is this something that Rashi and the Rambam, and by the way, I'm very interested in Rashi in these last few days. Rabbi Kelman knows why. I'm putting a lot of focus on Rashi. You should see, you can't see it there. I have all the books on Rashi, everything from Elie Wiesel's little biography of Rashi to Avram Grossman's studies to a good book on Rashi and the Christian scholars. I have to become a big bucky on Rashi. And there's so much about Rashi, let me tell you. But is it that Rashi and the Rambam came up with the same idea? Or is there a rabbinic source that's disappeared and they both say it? Because the Rambam also says, why do women light the Shabbos candles? Because their mitzuyos, they're found in the house. Rabbi Kook on his commentary there says that he couldn't say this reason that it's like a tikkun, that Eve was responsible for the death of Adam, because he sees this as an allegory. There never was a historical Eve who killed a historical Adam, and therefore there's no tikkun. So one of the people yesterday asked a good question. Well, what's the difference? So it's a vision or it's an allegory. It's presented in the Torah. So why does it have to be historically correct? It's still there to teach us an important lesson. So therefore you could still adopt it and still use it. And but Rav Kook thinks otherwise. He thinks because it has to be, there's no tikkun if there's no actual historical event like this. Now, this is in Rav Kook's commentary. You can see it. It's quite interesting. So, but where do you draw the line? Where does, as Rabbi Shalom Karmi wrote in discussing Rav Kook's approach, he says, he says it's obvious, or it seems obvious, or if Kook doesn't advocate wholesale rejection, of history in the Torah. He said, or the Bible, he says to do so would render Tanakh useless as a source of history. So under what circumstances would he, quote, deconstruct the text? He said, Rabbi Karmi says, where the texts contradict each other, or whether it contradicts historical statements, facts we know, or whether historicity is not important. In other words, where do you draw the line? Rav Kook was asked this question by a student of his named Moshe Zeidel. It spells it Seidel, but in Hebrew it's with a Zion, Moses Zeidel. This Moshe Zeidel was a student from Rav Kook already back in Latvia when Rav Kook was a rabbi there and was very close to Rav Kook. And Rav Kook sent him to Europe to get an education. Rav Kook, we spoke about Actually, we didn't speak about in one of the podcasts I did. I spoke about how Rav Kook, with all these ideas that he has about, we're going to see about secular studies, how important they are, etc. And yet his yeshiva, there was no secular studies. So he talks all about the importance of secular studies and a broad-based curriculum, all the things we've seen a little, we'll see more. And yet his own yeshiva, it wasn't much different than they focused on Eretz Yisrael and on Emunah, but they didn't study all these academic studies and Jewish philosophy. They didn't do that basically. The Nazir would meet privately with some students to do kuzari, but it wasn't part of the curriculum. So I guess Rav Kook figured that that'll come later. The most important thing is to focus on Eretz Yisrael and Emunah, but certain individuals he recommended that they expand themselves, and one of them was this Moshe Seidel. And Moshe Seidel, he gets academic training. The Otzar Hagaonim, They were from the Gaonic literature, where he pulled together all those texts that deal with on different Masechtas, the Gemaras. That and so now you study the Gemara, you open the Otzer Gaonim, you see what the Gaonim say. That was done by Dr. Moshe Zaidel. He also was in America for a number of years. His I know Dr. Reva helped raise money for the Otzer Gaonim, but he taught it in the graduate school at Yeshiva University. Or maybe then it was Yeshiva College, so it wouldn't be the graduate school then, the Teachers Institute. But he was in America. So he and some of Rav Kook's most important letters are written to Moshe Zaidel, letters dealing with issues of history and science. The one letter I didn't discuss early in the book, which I think is the most important letter, maybe another time we'll do it, is the letter of Rav Kook to the Ridban, Zakadol Orlovsky, and why he's so friendly to the irreligious. But okay, but Moshe Zaidel has some important letters, and Moshe Zaidel asked him, well, where do you draw the line? How far can we take the non-literal understanding of the Torah? And I wanted very much to see Moshe Zaidel's letter. And Rav Ari Shavat, who has taught for Torah in Motion many times, I think he's teaching right now as we speak, isn't he? So in addition to teaching, he taught my daughters in Israel. He teaches at a few different places, as far as I know. I know he teaches also at, they were at Tiferet, where he taught them, but he also teaches at the Midrash of the Rova. He also is, I think his title is Chief Archivist, head of the Rav Kook Archive. If you've never been to the Rav Kook house, next time you're in Jerusalem, I highly recommend it because, first of all, you see where Rav Kook, where he lived and where the yeshiva was, and they have a good movie there. But they also have the archive of Rav Kook, all of the letters, and now they've all been put online. And they saved everything basically, and everything Rav Kook wrote, everything Rav Kook, all their letters. So I was certain that they'd have Moshe Zaidel's letter to Rav Kook because you'd get insight from that. But lo and behold, they don't have any. They don't have that. So not everything survived. And but Rav Kook, because it would have been very nice to see the way Zaidel phrased it. We're going to see later two other important letters he wrote to Zaidel dealing with morality in Torah and also with Jewish law. Can we speak about the development of Jewish law or not? But in this letter, Rav Kook acknowledges, amazingly, that there is no clear line dividing what can be understood in a non-historical way. That is, what in a kosher Jewish fashion can be understood non-historically and what must be taken in a literal fashion. The only guidance he could offer is that the Jewish people as a whole will come to a proper insight in this. This is what he says, quote, although not every individual can distinguish precisely between what the Torah said allegorically and literally, the nation's clear sense finds the paths, not through isolated proofs, but through general intuition. Rav Kook is saying here that he doesn't have the answer, that this is I think he probably saw this, that they were at the beginning of this stage, with the scientific revolution and with new understandings. I mean, completely. Just think of you think of what Rav Kook lived through, the changes. And then you think of people like his successor of Herzog. You went from horse and buggies to flying in airplanes and everything, but and to atom bombs. But still, even what Rav Kook lived through, that my sense is that he saw this as just the beginning. And we'll see Rav Herzog tries to take it to the next level, but that the Jewish people as a whole, when he means Jewish people, he means the sense of the pious, the religious. We're going to see this with Jewish law also. This idea that a position will develop, and he is not prepared to say yet where to draw the line on this matter, but we will come to some general acceptance of this. And so, for instance, there's no evidence at all that he thought that, let's say, the flood story or the Tower of Babel should be taken non-literally or seen allegorically or any of these things. And he does tell us that when the Torah records the patriarchs and the Exodus, this is historically true, and do not pay attention to what any modern scholars claim. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that all the numbers, we'll talk about numbers, that these need to be taken literally, but the reality of the story, he says absolutely. So somewhere between, let's say, the Avos and Adam Harishon, we move from history, we move from not from meta history to history. I heard I don't want to say his name because he might not want me, but a very well-known rabbi and thinker that pretty much everyone in this audience would know said to me, I asked him about this, not about Rav Kook, just asked him in general, and he said that there seems to be something different in the way the Torah is written after the Migdal Bavel. That everything up to Migdal Bavel, he thought, was teaching lessons. It's not dealing with the Jewish people. It's really not dealing with history in a historical sense. It's pre-Am Yisrael. It's when assuming Avraham is the beginning of Am Yisrael, and the stories are of a different sort. So he himself thought that that's the sort of thing, and that's why it makes sense that many of the medievals would see these in a non-literal way. But Rav Kook doesn't say that at all. He he just he says we don't know. So now he's not prepared to read the genealogies in a non-literal fashion. That in Livruchei Ador we see that at least the way I understand it is that he's not prepared to read the genealogies. Um, Rabbi Sklar, who's coming out with Limvuchei Adar, we have a dispute on a passage because I read Rav Kook as stating that from this point on, which we discuss, I pointed in the book, Rav Kook is stating that the Torah is speaking of an individual man, Adam Harishon, whose descendants are now mentioned. But Sklar translates it not that from this point onward, the Torah is speaking about Adam, but rather from this point onward, the Torah, this is how he translates it. And his translation is coming out any week. From here onward, the Torah will tell mankind's story in detail, precise detail. I think that the word Adam there does not mean mankind, but it means Adam, actual historical man. But okay, so I hope I'm right. But if I'm not, then maybe he wasn't prepared to read a genealogy in non-literal um, in a non-literal fashion. But I think no. I think it's clear that once you get to the so if I'm right about this, then already but in the fourth chapter of Bereshit, that doesn't mean that every story is going to be literal, but at least we're given real history here. Because after all, what's the point of the genealogies there? Um, Rav Kook says also again the Lashitaso type of approach, the Rambam's approach, even if you have the mistaken idea, he says, that none of the stories in the Torah are to be regarded as historical. So that doesn't mean you throw out the Torah. On the contrary, you can still love this work because this is the precious words that God has given us. And so, I mean, you can even, and later he'll talk about even if you don't think it's divinely inspired, you still should respect it. But he says to them, he says that we will say to you who reject the Torah, you say that these are all legends. Even if it's that you say, legends also have such great capacity to bring about good and blessedness and noble. And this is also words of the living God. I don't think he means that it's literally, I don't think so, divinely inspired, but that they reflect divinity. Uh, he says you should also honor our stories, even if you don't believe in them. They're our stories. They're the stories of the Jewish people, and this is how Jews act, and these are our heroes, and this is so. I mean, he obviously doesn't accept this, but this is a Lashitaso type of argument. Later in the book, I criticize Yehuda Mirsky because Rav Kook explains how even if you accept all the assumptions of higher biblical criticism, you still should follow Torah. And Yehuda Mirsky, in his excellent, amazing book that everyone should read, explains this as saying that Rav Kook was able to even accept biblical criticism, but no, it's not true. It was only, he personally thinks it's a terrible mistake, but for those people who do accept it, that doesn't mean that they throw out the Torah. That doesn't mean they don't need to observe Shabbos and Kashrus. He wants to give an explanation, a reason, even for people who reject. Um, One final thing I'll say, because I think it's also 925. On page 38 and 39, that's where I start getting into a lot of tangents, because the question is, how did the medievals view these early stories? And the Ralbag sees the Rambam as viewing, for example, Chava as an allegorical figure. He thinks that Adam and Chava are just, they stand for archetypes, I guess, of humanity. And the Ralbag is usually the more controversial one. And the Rambam hints to this, but he doesn't say it explicitly. But the Ralbag says that's clearly what he's saying. But the Ralbag says absolutely false because we have the genealogies. The genealogies begin with Adam Harishon. So the Ralbag says obviously the story of the snake is to be understood allegorically, but there were first people. Absolutely. Um, well, what about Cain, Hevel, Seth? Did the Rambam understand them literally as well? And I cite it's a standard medieval view of the Rambam, of his interpreters, that these figures were also to be understood allegorically. I mean, from the Rambam's perspective, I mean, if you look in the Torah story, Cain, Cain is a prophet. God speaks to him. So if you look at how the Rambam understands prophecy, prophecy, Cain, I call him, he's a brute, right? How can he be a prophet? A prophet has to be someone who expands his intellect, is close to God. Cain is like the opposite of a prophet. So the Ralbag? The Ralbag takes it literally. The Ralbag says, of course Cain's a prophet. Prophets also can have like a brutish side to them. So we see the story. All we see here is his brutish side. But that doesn't mean that Cain wasn't a great figure, and King David also, I guess you would say, had a brutish side, if I could say this. That's why he did with Bathsheba. But so for the Rambam, we understand why the medieval interpreters would see this all as an allegory, not literal. But the question, and we're descended from Seth. I mean, that's who we're descended from. But so I go into great detail about this. Now, what I want to do next class is not just go more into the Rambam and more into Rav Kook, because Rav Kook says an amazing thing. He has a passage which I don't know if it was ever really explained properly. I'm praising myself here, but I don't think anyone explained it properly, not because they couldn't, because I don't think anyone ever focused on this passage. There's a passage in Rav Kook. Shalom Rosenberg refers to it, but he doesn't really go into detail. Shalom Rosenberg was a great scholar. Believe me, he understood the passage a lot better than I do. But I don't think anyone really explained it the way I did. So Rav Kook opens up a Pandora's box, which we'll have to try to grasp, and even practically what we can do with this, and then we'll move on to Rav Herzog, because Rav Herzog, see, Rav Kook is a theoretician, he's a philosopher, he's a mystic, and he knows basically what's going on in the outside world, history and science. But Rav Herzog, I'll tell you about Rav Herzog. He's an expert in all these matters, and he has a big problem because he's reading history and he's reading science, and he sees that there's civilizations in Africa. We have records of them for, let's say, 100,000 years, and a civilization in India, 50,000 years. And what then to do with the record of the Torah, which would put us on Earth under 6,000 years? And Rav Herzog, as one of the Gedolei Yisrael of massive proportions, who understands the problem, I think you'll find very interesting possible solutions he offers without even knowing he was bringing back a medieval approach. And I think a lot of you intuitively might sense what Rav Herzog is going to say, but he was the first one to say it, and it was never published. It's first published on a blog post I did, and then in this book. And in my last blog post, I actually found another letter which we'll go through with you next class, but just to whet your appetite, Rav Herzog says he wants to write a new guide to the perplexed. He didn't know about Rav Kook's, and he says he needs one other figure to help him on it, otherwise he can't do it. Rav Soloveitchik. I can deal the history, can do the history, but he also needs a philosopher. And he says, oh, like Rav Soloveitchik is the philosopher. So these are the issues we're going to deal with. It's a long chapter, so we need another class to get through that chapter. But let me take the questions and comments. I understand that some of this is provocative stuff, and I think Rav Kook's answer to Seidel was so important. He doesn't have the answer. Rav Kook knows, he says, I don't have the answer to this. He's giving us a pathway, initial steps, a direction, He knows that not everything in Torah is taken literally. In fact, he says that about the creation story, you're not allowed to teach it to like two people. You're not. Why? So if Cook says, "What do you mean? If it's all meant to be literal, then a 7-year-old kid can read and understand it. But there's deep meanings, there's secrets there, and it's not on the surface level. Anyone who reads the Bereshit story on the surface level, they're missing the whole point. Well, I shouldn't say missing the whole point, but for basic level, that's fine. But when Chazal said you can't teach it, they're not talking about basic level. Everyone, we teach again first graders, but there's more to it than meets the eye. You have to go beyond the curtain there. It's like the Wizard of Oz. You have to pull away the curtain, and that's where you get the real meanings. And that's where matters aren't 100% clear. We know it's not literal, Rav Kook says. But once we know it's not literal, what then is it? How are we supposed to understand it? Is it allegory? Is it a myth? Myth does not mean fairy tale. That's not what a myth is. A myth is a non-historical way of expressing values. And are we being taught the most important lessons of humanity through a story that's not meant to be taken literally? I mean, these are all the questions that are raised by Rav Kook, by Rav Herzog, by Rav Chaim Hershenson, by others, and I'm very impressed by Rav Kook's his honesty in that his humility that he doesn't have an answer to all these things. So let me take some of the questions here. Joyce, was there any correspondence between Racha Mendel Schneerson and Rav Kook? Okay, it's a good question. No, because Rav Kook dies in 35 and the Rebbe is not a significant figure till then. But remind me next class, I don't mention that the Lubavitcher Rebbe has a correspondence with Rav Herzog. Because Rav Herzog, knowing that the Lubavitcher Rebbe is also a scientific background, he sends the same questions to Lubavitcher Rebbe that he sends to all these great scientists and historians. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe, right? I would love to know what Rav Herzog thought. The Lubavitcher Rebbe writes back to Rav Herzog saying, you have to believe the world is this years old. I mean, basically fossils, God planted them, all these sorts, the old Lubavitch approach, and which obviously Rav Herzog would not have been satisfied with. Um, the only time I know that the Lubavitcher Rebbe mentions Rav Kook is there's a great book called Nine and a Half Mystics. It's by Herbert Weiner. Herbert Weiner was a Reform rabbi who had a synagogue very near me in New Jersey. And when he retired, by the way, he said to the congregation, you know that in the inside I'm Orthodox. And they said, yes, we always knew that. I think that meant feeling wise he was. So he talks about his different figures he meets. He went to see Rav Kook, and he went to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe was very interesting. Lubavitcher Rebbe was amazing. Lubavitcher Rebbe, like the Pasuk said, Basher Sham. Lubavitcher Rebbe was able to see the talent and the abilities of every individual. And he knew that Herbert Weiner wasn't going to, leave his congregation and do tshuva and become an Orthodox Jew, but he could still do a lot of important things while being a Reform rabbi in that synagogue. What could he do? He could bring people back to tradition. He could, the Rebbe was able to see, and of course the Rebbe did not believe in Reform Judaism, but he understood that everyone had a role to play, and at this point in his life, Herbert Weiner's role was to bring Yiddishkeit of a sort to people who had very little of it, and he did that wonderfully. And so you got to read the discussions of Herbert Weiner and the Rebbe. But Herbert Weiner asked the Rebbe, well, because he was becoming very interested in Rav Kook. Rav Kook, what about Rav Kook? And the Rebbe says, he was quiet. The Rebbe's critique was that he tried to do too much. That he tried to bring in too much, and you got the philosophy, the poetry. So the Rebbe was not satisfied with Rav Kook's solution to the problems of being a Jew in a modern time. And of course, Rav Kook would not at all be satisfied with the Rebbe's solution of, he might be satisfied with certain aspects of the Rebbe's solution. The Rebbe had so many amazing things to say, but in terms of his, what we can only call a fundamentalist, literalist approach to, even with regard to the astronomy of the Rambam, the Rebbe adopted a Ptolemaic approach. The Rebbe believed that the Torah teaches that the sun and the planets revolve around the earth. And he says that based on the theory of relativity, that today it says that you can't prove one over the other. I asked a physicist at my university what he thought about this, and he thought it was complete nonsense. But that's the Rebbe. That's the only time I ever know he referred to Rav Kook. And Susanna says Eliyahu Navi had a brutish side. What do you mean by that? You mean with the Elisha, maybe? I don't know. Eliyahu, the
Well,
brutal. I don't know.
Eliyahu, he's he's always he's making trouble, and in the end, God has to takes him out to Chorev and says, like, what are you doing here? And he says, the people, they don't listen to me. And then there's that whole business about the storm and all that, and this and the Kol Dvamad Daka, and he still doesn't, Eliyahu still doesn't get it.
Okay, but I use the word brutish, I think of as a more of like a physical, sensual, chomer, matter attached to matter. That side. I don't see that. I never really saw that with Eliyahu. With David, he had a Yetzer Hara. He sent someone to his death. That's that's
Yeah, that's
that could
different.
be
Yeah.
that and he says I sinned, and because it's an authentic tshuva, it's forgiven. So I mean, I don't know if brutish is the right word, but just a more of a physical sense.
Yeah,
That's
I
what I
see.
meant. Yes, Bilam. Well, of course, Bilam. The it's very clear that Bilam's a prophet from all the rabbinic sources, but Rav Kafech says that according to the Rambam, Bilam is not a prophet. He's a kosem, a magician who has maybe Ruach HaKodesh, but not real Nevuah. And it's very difficult to read this into the Rambam, but that's what Rav Kafach says. But yes, Bilam had those sides as well. But we see this, we see Bilam, but we don't see Cain. What do we see? Always, unless you're going to say that the very fact that God speaks to him shows that he has that other side. I guess that's the Ralbag's position. Nikki says a day in creation cannot be a 24-hour day since the sun and moon were not created until the fourth day. Well, it could be 24 hours. It just can't be the rising of the sun and the setting. It could still be a 24-hour period. You're right. The sun, and I ask my students always, what day is it created? People don't, they have to think about it. It's obviously the fact that you don't have a sun on the first, second, third day is showing you, presumably, that we're not dealing with what we think of as day and night. I mean, Vayer Vayvoker, what is Vayer Vayvoker without a sun? So that would presumably lead you in that direction. But yes, Baba Yamim old in years, but you know what happened. Many of you know what happened when Rabbi Slifkin published his book arguing this, and he didn't think he was doing anything controversial. He was doing what Esha Torah had been doing for years. He had taught Esha Torah. He just was trying to present in a more detailed fashion what had been the Haredi orthodoxy in America ever since they got into the science versus Torah issues from 50 years ago. And this was solved all the problems about dinosaurs and everything. That when it says, the first day, this could be a billion years, and the dinosaurs lived in that period and everything. And that was what the Haredim in America were all taught. So it was a complete reset when all of a sudden, from Eretz Yisrael, they're telling you that everything you've been teaching for all these years is heresy, and you have to adopt a new approach. But Rav Herzog, he's not going to deal with this. The other problem is, how about from the creation of humanity? Then you're not dealing with the days of creation, which you could say are billions of years old. Then you're dealing with the creation of man from then to today. That's going to be a much more troubling problem that Rav Herzog is going to deal with, because you have on the one hand civilizations that have lived say 20, 30,000 years old. We have documentation of it versus what the Torah says. So that's going to be much more of it. And wait till you see how Rav Herzog has to tackle this. Rav Kook never dealt with this. That wasn't his issue. His issue was really creation, evolution. Um, Okay, this is, I don't think Rabbi Kelman, we're going to meet for another till 3 weeks, right?
Correct.
Even
That's
after
correct.
we've read Parshas Bereshis.
That's
So if
correct.
the insights of Rav Kook are not going to be, Rav Herzog are not going to be applicable, but we'll get to it afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not convinced that all the Haredim had this pro-science approach. Of course, the Rabbi Slipkin thing changed everything, but
No, no, many did not. Absolutely, many did not.
many did. Yeah, you're 100%
But
right.
many did, and not just for Kirov. I mean, I was taught
Right.
that growing up.
I'm sorry?
I was taught that growing up, and I wasn't in a Kiruv yeshiva.
No,
You know,
but you weren't in a real right-wing
no,
yeshiva.
but I had Haredi Rebbeim. Oh, yes,
Uh,
absolutely. Once
yeah.
I got to high school, it was all Haredi Rebbeim, and that was never regarded as problematic to say that at all. In fact, that was the standard answer. Every time a kid would ask a question like that they didn't deny they were dinosaurs. They never said that this is a test. You know, as a Christian fundamentalist who came up with this idea, they never said it's God testing us by putting them in the ground. We were never told anything like that. No, we were told, like the Tiferes Yisrael, that there are eons, the Midrash, that worlds were created and destroyed, that the only thing's important that this world is 6,000 years old. Before that, you could have billions and billions. But Rav Herzog is going to grab the bull by the horns because this world is only 6,000 years old. What about what if we can show that it's not? Then what are we supposed to do? And okay, we will pick up on that. I guess when we return, I want to wish
3 weeks,
everyone
please God.
Gemar
Yeah.
Chasima Tova, and hopefully good news is coming out of Washington, and that we hope. And okay, that's all. You don't want
All
to.
right. Thank you. Yes, yes. Okay. Tomorrow, Rabbi Schulman at 1 p.m. and on Sefer Yonah. Friday, my class on Sukkot, the Siddur Sukkot, and Sunday, of course, our Yom Yun on on Sukkot, beginning at 9:15. I put the link there if you haven't registered yet, just so we have for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And we are having a partial V'zot HaBracha shir that will be on Chol Hamoed Sukkot. We'll be having we'll send the details. We got to get all the parshiyot in, so we will have because with young anyways we'll. For Zod Bracha. Okay, just keep posted. Anyways, I agree. Let's just wish everybody Kamar Chatima Tova, be well. Our prayers for peace and all good things, health, but the peace for the Jewish people should please God be answered.
Amen.
And we look forward to a wonderful year for the Jewish people and the world at large. All right, thank you, everybody.
Amen.
Okay, Lila Tov.
Laila Tov.